it had not been intended that as much space should elapse between my first lecture and the second and third, which I was asked to do in the series. But we all know that given the situation of African people, many times, or most times, we have no choice but to jump on our horses and ride off in all directions at once, however absurd that may seem. So though I haven't been here, it's been because there are many other things which call for our attention simultaneously. I have a few prefatory remarks for those of you who was not here at the beginning. Brother Yusuf Pitter, will you stand please, Brother Pitter? I said get up. Brother Brown, Crimson Brown, hey man, I didn't tell you to sit down again. Yes. And the reason I'm asked, turn around so these folk can see what y'all look like from the front. No, let me say there's a reason for, I'll tell you when. The reason I'm asking them, and this has been my policy lately to do this, is because too often we've been programmed to take people who serve us for granted. And this is a brother. The other dude, he's crazy, he's Southern Geechee like me. But this is a brother that will usually pick me up, go where I want, drive me to Philadelphia, tape after he gets there, stay on my case. He plays the tapes, gives me cues and all the rest of the stuff. Brother Brown has stuff that I need, and I'm going to be sharing something with you because those of you who came here today, you're going to get a little extra treat, which I will go into in a minute. So I would like you to give these brothers a good hand because they have been keeping the faith. Yeah. You can applaud. Thank you. This should be a habit with us. We should not, another thing, we should not miss any opportunity to congratulate and put our children, praise them, and put them up on a pedestal. They need all the help they can get. We don't do that enough, I don't think. And we have prefatory remarks. For those of you who are here the first time, Brother Pitzer suggested, I think it's a good suggestion, that it might be a good idea for me to start off with a little synopsis so that you understand where we came from and maybe even refresh the memories of some of the people who were here the last time. But then, what else you're getting? Now, remember what I said about what these brothers have been doing. For the last 2 weeks, as you are aware, there has been a trial in federal court in Foley Square in Manhattan. Dr. Leonard Jeffries, or as they put it in legal parlance, Jeffries versus Halston and the City University of New York. Now, those of you who are rich and eat high on the hog and are fortunate enough to have cable, and you live in them semi-Caucasian neighborhoods where y'all can get them things, where we live in Brooklyn, I don't even know what the cable stations are. But if you had more money to go where they're going, because even if he wins, they are not going to sit there and play dead. They have to appeal. And the way it looks now, it does not look good in legal terms for the bad guys. But we know it ain't about what's legal. And in terms of, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but you watch the manipulation. Notice how many times whenever Fleming, this man's a genius. Trust me, he's the best at even the crackers got to say, man, this dude, I have to share this with y'all. Because I watch this brother, he just eases up there, you know, and slips and slides, like sort of semi-modern, updated version of Step and Fetch It, and firing them bullets, pow, pow, pow. And these people going, where the hell he come from? But the other thing they play games with is how they use the media in subtle ways. You'll notice that whenever one of the opposition is up on the stand, and Fleming gets him or her in a tight spot, suddenly the people who are broadcasting this remember they got to go to a commercial break. And they say, we'll give you the gist of what was said when we come back. Now, sometimes they come back and they say, well, they said so and so and so, and they go. Then they play the other game when they give you the background of what the issues be. They show a clip of Dr. Jeffries, where he makes the speech, or he starts to make the speech about the role that Jews played in the slave trade and that Russian Jews played in Hollywood. And then they cut. Right?
Yes? One other thing, too. If you notice, after each person takes a stand, they have a calling segment.
That's correct, yes.
In segment, I would say about 99% of people called in support Dr. Jeffrey, both white and black.
That is correct.
I think they're very surprised.
That is correct. And now the other thing is the commentators, and I'm saying this because you need to understand this where we're going. The commentators, you want 5 more lectures to deal with, no problem. But we need to look at this because this is current, and you'll see where I'm going in a minute. I'm constantly saying to you, Dr. J, Dr. Clark, we're not geniuses, but we have experience. We're constantly saying to you, the most fundamental thing in this culture is the cult of denial, the lies and whatnot. They can look you in the face and you can see them with 15 hands in a cookie jar and they say, you lying, I didn't do nothing. And all of these things that we've been saying comes together in this trial. The contempt that they have, even to the extent of not even preparing properly to be cross-examined on the witness stand. And now what I'm saying to you is the next thing we've always said to you. A wounded lion is dangerous. Right? A wounded lion is dangerous. And these folks are wounded on several days. And one of the black lawyers, Brewster, he commented on that about when they said, what a great job and how fair that Fleming is being. This dude, he thinks like me. And I hope that don't sound, because he can pick up something and tie it in and bam, bam. And when they're trying to knock up something, they open up another road and wham, he goes down that road. And then somebody said that he doesn't pick. It's talking about Reynolds, the chancellor, and he don't get on her. And the guy said, yeah, because if he starts to harass her like them other dudes do a paramedic job, the first thing they'll say, hey, there's that nigga harassing that white woman. And so what is happening on the stage goes west. So the idea simply is these are some of the things that you are finally getting a chance to see. The other thing is media again. And I have first-hand information here, which the brother will talk to you when he get up here. The first day of the trial, all the media was there. When they saw which way the thing was going, they cut out. That's right. And man, you got to look. You can't find nothing in none of the press about this. And yet, this is a case which they say is the most important First Amendment case to come in this century. It is the most important case since Dred Scott in terms of dealing with us and our legal rights. Now, these are the same people who smeared Jeffries, called him everything but a child of God. But inside the courtroom, now it becomes a question of fact. Yes, it was. No, it wasn't. They don't want to deal with this. Since you can't lie now, you ain't got no thing to go. So all of these things that we have dealt with you, in which hopefully you become sophisticated enough to see through these games, but they are giving us a classic example of the nature of how Western society works. I'm going to leave about 40 minutes at the end, because I know all people don't have, and I spoke to Brother Peter Folk, because I would like you to see at least a couple of excerpts from this hearing for you to carry away from it. Was that agreeable to everybody? Yeah. Right? Okay? All right? You see, we have to do what we have to do, because everybody ain't rich like me. But what we are having here, one thing I've done with Ann Reynolds, which of course shows how the commentary go, but the gentleman who has been in the courtroom every day, taping, is the same gentleman, one of the gentlemen I just asked you to saw, Minister Brown. He's been taping from gavel to gavel. Am I correct, sir? And so what will happen when this is done, Minister Brown is putting together a series of all the tapes. He's head of Transatlantic Productions, so you will then have access to the complete or all, a set. I assume that will be either a set or in the individual tapes you want. Try to get them, because I would argue that this is one of the best teaching tools that we could ever have, handed to us in a sense on a silver platter, through no intention of their own. So the ramifications of this thing goes way beyond, and there are connections that ties exactly in with when we talk about the history, and I'm going to segue into that, of what concerns us here, because we see that even when you talk about the Bible or Bibles as a political document, remember You are offered the Bible as the highest law. Is that right? Am I right or wrong? They say that this is God's law, and God's law is supposed to transcend all laws beneath that. What then if God's law, or what they say is God's law, is corrupt? Think about that, right? So then we need to look at this and say, well, if this is God's law, who did God come down to? First of all, what is your concept of God? This is where we went last week. We are looking at how the dynamics of this Bible, because as the brother said earlier, this has been the key weapon in conditioning African people's minds. As Dr. Ben said in another connection, one of the supreme irony in this is that an indigenous religion of Africa was taken out of Africa, exported into Europe, corrupted, and then handed back to African people and said, this is the final word. And I hope that I can show you that pattern. I started out last time, just briefly synopsis, I started out by giving you an overview. I told you about the experience that I had, which started me off on this, with one of our numerous sects. This is another thing about mind conditioning, because once I get your mind in a certain area, then the rest is icing on the cake. Once I can convince you that any word is God's word or is written in stone, anything else I tell you is very easy, because you ain't supposed to question. Anything that looks irrational, if you start to question, somebody says, well, hey, this is about faith. You're supposed to take this on faith. Anybody in this room tried to pay their mortgage with faith lately? Anybody in this room, when the landlord or landlady came for the rent, says, I ain't got no money, Miss Jones, but I tell you what I do. I got $400 worth of faith. Will you take that, and I'll try to have some real money next time? They tell you quick. They don't know who to send for first. The sheriff with the eviction notice or the person with the restraining suit, because something's got to be wrong in your mind in order to do this. Yet we are programmed to make these divisions in our heads so that certain things we don't question. If it's said on faith, oh, I don't argue the Bible. That's written stone. Who the hell told you it was written stone? Well, the same person that told you was God's word. Now, therefore, we need to look at that. And what I'm concerned with, I don't care what you feel spiritually, what we are concerned with is how has those books called Bibles been used as tools to exploit African people. We put it to the same test that we put in, or we should put anything else. The Jews have a statement which they follow almost slavishly. The first question they ask about anything they are asked to support is it good or bad for the Jews? If the answer to that is, I don't know or no, then they ain't bothering with it. We have gotten caught in a situation where we have been programmed that it is incumbent upon us to look out for everybody else's interests before we look out for ours. And to the extent this has become so prevalent that at the time when we begin to look out for our interests, we are accused of being traitors or anti-this or anti-that. Everybody else can be anti-anything. There's a new book out, I want to show it illustrates that, how religion and the Bible has been used for empowerment, not by us, certainly by the two dominant religious groups, ethnic groups in the Northeast, the Italian and the Irish Catholics. And there's a new book that came out, and of course it applies here to Newark also. It's rather expensive. Columbia University Press just published it, called On Being Mayor of New York. And it's a whole history of the various groups' struggle to get the political power in New York. And they start, of course, with the Irish and the problems that we've just touched on here, what they had, the potato famine. But the one thing they had learned from the English, being kicked in the butt all those years, that they understood that the English legal and judicial system, you see the connection between Jeffries, was not set up. They discovered that government was really about one group having the power to dominate another group by any means necessary. And since they had been misused by the English legal system, when they came here, they wasn't about to get caught up in this. They went in and they moved it, but they created their own secret system in order to get power. And what was the methodology? They had always been Catholics. They looked at the political system, Newark, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and they discovered that the way that the political system was structured, it was laid out in groups just like the Catholic diocese, with the parish, which would be the district, the parish priest corresponding to the district leader, and then the next largest thing, the county or whatnot, would then have the bishop, then the archbishop. So in other words, they just took that model from the church, you follow me, and applied it to the political system. And within 50 years, they had taken the system over completely from the Anglo-Saxon forebear, and they said, morality has nothing to do with it. Now, how does this tie in with our subject? Now, these people will tell you they're devout Catholics. I would argue that every policeman in Newark, probably 95% of them who are white, are some kind of Catholic, Irish, or Italian. We make up the predominant inhabitants of the city, but I ain't been around you, but I know who your fire department is, and I know who your police department is. And they ain't living in Newark any more than the ones in New York is living in Brooklyn or Manhattan. But the glue that holds them all together is that Catholic Church. Now, when you look at the basic book of the Catholic Church, see this book here says, the Holy Bible, right? Old letter, red letter edition. The authorized King James Version. Now, the same people who would tell you, you don't argue the Bible, you don't argue religion. You follow where I'm coming from? And if you handed this Bible to an Irish Catholic, or a Polish Catholic, or an Italian Catholic, or a Greek or Russian Orthodox person, they would look at it and drop it like it was a hot poker. Yet it says here, Holy Bible. Now when they see Holy Bible, they would pick it up because they understand the word Bible. But now when you open it up and you see here it says, containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the original tongues, and with the former translations diligently compared and revised. Whenever anything starts out with this as a preface, beware, because they're getting ready to run a con game on you. Yeah, no, the question of who did it or what not. You're just supposed to take their word. And then it says, the authorized King James Version. And we all know, because I would hazard most folks in here, if they follow any part of the Christian faith, most of you in here are some kind of Protestants. If you went out this morning and you watched Catholics going to Mass, most of them would have a Bible in their hand. But if you open that Bible, would it say authorized King James Version, Reverend Brown? No. No. It would be a Bible they call the Douay version. They can't even agree, the Protestant and Catholic versions and the Orthodox, or what they call the Russian Orthodox and the Greek Orthodox, they cannot even agree on the names of the books of the Bible. They can't even agree on the sequence of the books, how they should be. You don't have to be no biblical scholar to see that. Just go in a library where you got these three Bibles. They cannot agree on the sequence of the books, and they can't agree on the number of the books. How then are you or me wanting to know knowledge? How are we going to find out this? And then we have to ask ourselves, if you think, what's going on? Why do we have all these folks sit and say, you ask the Greek, what are you? I'm a Christian. What about the Russian Orthodox? I'm a Christian. Huh? What about the Italian Catholic? I'm a Christian. The Protestants, the Methodists, all of them are Christians. And yet you got all of these Bibles. Not only you got all these Bibles, about every 30 or 40 years, various biblical scholars come together and they pick up one of these Bibles and they look at it and they say, it's time for revision. We have found out certain new information, or we think we have discovered certain new information. What new information? Well, there's a whole lot of mistranslations of things that we didn't understand when we did the last translation. As you see throughout your Bible, and listen, I don't knock it, it's beautiful literature. But so are the Greek myths. So are African folk tales. But you don't pass them off as being true. You know? So if you argue as literature, that's one thing. But when you're saying this is the Word of God, you argue fact, and then you say, well, how many times must you revise this all-powerful Word of God to keep coming up and correcting what you say a mistake? How could there be mistakes in the Word of God? There's a contradiction. If the Supreme Being is all-powerful, and he wants to understand, why doesn't he make all of this, he or she, as the case may be? It would be a shock to a whole lot of people if they died and found out the Supreme Being was a woman, or maybe not even a human being at all. Or maybe there ain't nobody in charge. You have to consider all these possibilities. You know, you can't call yourself a thinking person if you've never asked yourself the question, whence came I? And you say, from my mama's womb. Okay, then back from her and back from there. So you got all of these concepts that we as thinking beings have at least once. If you ask yourself that question, then you haven't really a chance much. But when you ask that question, that's why they say faith, because you ask one question and that leads to other questions. And then when you begin to see the contradictions, you watch biblical scholars holding at least every year in this country. There are at least 100 biblical scholars conferences which are held, both Protestant and all the rest, to pick up this book or that book and look at it and go over it and re-examine it. Now, and this is a process that has been going on since the beginning. Beginning with the Word. The Word in of itself has no meaning as holy book. It started out, you can check me out on this, it comes from an ancient word, Aramaic, biblios, which comes to us, which was translated by the Greek into biblios or papyrus, which is a special kind of paper. The biblios itself, the base was a reed, which is very prominent during the Mediterranean. And in the old days of making paper, these reeds, hollow reeds, was cut down, split into many parts, watered, beaten, and then a kind of a paper made. That's how come in the early days, instead of having books that open like this, you had what they call scrolls. Because you can see it's easy if you beat something out to do it this way than to cut it up. Because once you start cutting, then you need a process of binding it together, etc., etc. If you doubt what I'm saying, then let us consider the greatest find in the last 100 years, which everybody agrees, biblical scholars, that is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Keyword, scrolls. Anybody can tell me, where are they today? That's correct. Do scholars have access to them? Only certain scholars who they predesignate can go and have access to those scrolls. And that means there's only about 6 scholars in the world who've ever seen them since they were pulled out of this cave. Now what's the irony in this? Did an archaeologist find these scrolls? No. How about a theologian? How about a biblical scholar? No? How about a philosopher? Historian? No. Who found them, ironically, was an illiterate Arab shepherd boy who out one day followed, according to the story, followed one of his lambs who strayed away and went into this cave, and there where somebody said, God, how many years ago is the scroll? He might have been illiterate, but he wasn't so illiterate that he didn't know the importance of what he found. And within 24 hours, man, he had been completely left out of the loop. They moved in on them things, kadoom. And yet, what we know of those scrolls, or what has been released, and many scholars are yelling and screaming now at the Israeli government to release these scrolls. And the Israeli government says, no way, Jose, or Yusuf, or Eusephus, or however they would say it in Israel. But now the question then becomes why? Well, very easy, because they already know. The scholars who've seen it says there's a tremendous amount of material. These scrolls go back to the time that the first of these so-called, or let's say the period of Christ. And that's before this, because the first Bible didn't come into existence until about 400 years after. But they don't tell you that. God sort of decided that he wasn't going to let you have the word written stone for a little while. After, so he sort of held back then forward and said, okay, y'all can go ahead and write the Bible now. But the question, that version. So when we stop to look at this, we see that the problem is, as stated, I haven't seen them, is that there are many discrepancies, and since the scroll is the oldest version, there are many discrepancies between the scrolls and all of the various interpretations they've come down with. Therefore, it is in the interest of the powers that be not to open up any cans of worms, because now their whole scholarship becomes suspect. Which brings us back to Dr. J. What happens to people when you speak unthinkable truths? First, you got to destroy, to kill the messenger that brings the bad news. So if you can see, if you can look at that trial, that hearing that's being held across the river where I live now, and see that in parallel terms of what we are talking about here, it becomes very clear that as far as trying to control things, as far as trying to obfuscate things, as far as trying to confuse the issue, nothing has changed, because human beings basically don't change, particularly not culture. And we in this room know we are all sitting here primarily because of distortions of humanity, of distortions of values, of distortions of morality, to rationalize exploiting us, and a main part of that was their version of something they call the Holy Bible. If you're going to be asked to take it on faith, then you ain't supposed to look at the history to ask the question, why? I would hazard a guess that most folks, and I trust you, if you go out here on say a nice day like yesterday, and the most populated pedestrian area in this city you can find, and just ask every person you meet at random, pardon me, who was King James? And I'll give you a nickel. I'm not a rich man, but I'll give you a nickel for everybody who can tell you who he was. And yet you say, what about the King James? Oh yeah, that's the authorized Protestant Bible. What is the connection between this Bible and King James? Whenever y'all finish, let me know, Mr. Peter. I don't really want to. I understand it's a very important technical conversation, your high-tech conversation, and I know it's much more important than anything that's going up here. Is y'all true? Thank you. I appreciate it. So we use terms, or we've been programmed to use terms without even thinking about the meaning of them. That's what faith will do to you. What faith does is nurture ignorance. Not only does it nurture it, it puts a premium on it. Because after a certain level, no, don't tell me the truth. I don't see that. No, God strike me down if you question that. The threat of using demons to get on the case of folks that don't behave goes back long before there was ever a Christian or Christianity. So let us again look at these terms we look so glibly. A couple of weeks ago, And I love the games they play, which fits right into here. As y'all begin to put pressure on folks, certain questions have to be rethought and re-asked. This gentleman, Phil Donahue, had a session on, was Jesus black? See how cute this is? Watch the game. You pose it. If you pose it as a question, then anybody who gets up and say yeah has already lost. When the hell are we going to learn? Was Jesus black? So that creates a doubt. As many of the people in the audience came up and was able, to the extent they were permitted, it's like the Jeffries case all over again. Same techniques as long as it works. You repeat it. You don't stop betting on a winning horse or a winning number. When the number don't come out no more, then you play another number. You'd be stupid to keep, if 506 keep coming out, don't go play 903. Then you play 506 until it stops coming. Then you get on another number. But it's very interesting and how the parallels of what they do tie in with everything else. So that when you're asked a question and they answer you with a question, what are you to make of that question? How can you get an answer if you can't ask a question? And if the question doesn't have an answer, that's still no reason for not asking the question. There might be an answer coming down the line after a while. So when you look at all of these questions about does God exist and if there's a Christianity in the term of the Bible and what they're talking about and how it is, as I would say, misused, and then you look at this history of going all the way back and looking at the terminology, and you begin to see certain discrepancies. So when people started coming up, and guess who was there? Dr. Simmons. They went loaded for bear. Books, everything, and all the stuff coming like I walk around here. Now, as I told y'all, I don't even go to them things no more. When they invite me, don't go there because you can't win. As long as I'm standing up here, I control this mic. You can't ask me no question that I don't want you to ask me. Or if you ask the question, I just shout you down. See, I just said to them guys, see, this controls that. Donahue them are the professional. Don't ever think you're going to go on one of them programs and upstage these people. Because their last resort is, you ask that on similar question, we'll be right back. Take a break. Hold your point right there. Never come back. When they come back, they move to something else or go to one of their plants in the audience.
They did that with that lady on there when she called in about the Bible.
That is correct.
And when she said on there about, well, Phil, you've been saying they've been lying maybe for 2,000 years.
That's correct.
The Bible, and so maybe we need to rethink the whole
Thank you.
thing.
Right? And then watch what happens. You make a point, but it's like kind of grab smoke with these people. That's what I'm saying. You got to look at it. It's not a simple thing of coming up and doing self-lecture. You're trying to grab the smoke because as soon now as it becomes clear that the people who said Jesus was black, and they proved the point, well, we know historically he had to be nothing else but black. Of course, Jeffries and I, we are called racist, and Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark say, because ain't nobody looking at what you're saying. They just label you racist or professor of hate and get their hired guns like Cornel West and the other flunkies and assholes like Shelby Steele and them, and they come out grinning, and as long as they pay them, they'll say any damn thing. So, and they know that. When they get through with them, they finish with them. Another parallel. When you see Chancellor Ann Reynolds' testimony, you correct me if I'm wrong, Minister Brown, every time Fleming asked her a direct question about something, did you or did you do this? She said, well, I was informed by Dr. Halston. He had indicated, I'm not asking you this. The man asked her a question 5 times. Finally, the judge says, he's asked you a very simple question, Chancellor. Answer you must. I don't want to have to spend no more time asking. And what would happen because of contempt? You could see the contempt for this man. It never dawned on this Caucasian woman that she was outgunned, outclassed, outsmarted, and out-intelligenced. I just invented that word. No, because, see, this is what culture do for you. So you see, it's a classic example of how culture can blind you to reality. I'm white. This nigga got no business doing this, and this dude is just fine bum, right? And finally, she turns to the judge, and the judge says, you must answer the question. You're a witness. This lady, who is the chief executive of the third largest university system in the world, PhD in God knows what, when the judge says you must answer this question yes or no, the man has asked you 5 times, she turns to the judge and says, Your Honor, can I ask him a question? Am I lying, sir? You heard this? Can I, huh?
And they were so terrible, the people from the college.
Thank you.
The commentators keep saying, they're very bright, intelligent people.
Thank you, trying to clean up the act. But that wasn't the issue. I'm telling you here what the issue is. And I'm tying it in because what you see, what we are saying historically happened with these Bibles is precisely the same things parallel that is happening now. They're actually what they're doing, they're feeding you shit and telling you it's sugar, and you ought to be smiling. No? And if you say it don't taste or smell like sugar, then they say there's something wrong with your taste buds. You see? And if they do that to you long enough, you get psyched out, and they say, how'd your sugar smell? Oh, it's fine, boss. Hey, never had such flavor like this. You see? Because it always comes down to mind over matter, and this is what the basic struggle about, is mind over matter. So you must always look at that. It's not a question of looking at this in terms of anxious, as I bring this down to you chronology. You can do this as an exercise. That's interesting and fascinating. But unless I can show that how this has been used as a part of that process, which affects our everyday lives, then you might as well say, well, okay, Professor Mackey, this is interesting philosophy. But nevertheless, it doesn't change anything for me. So when you saw what happened, the games they play, we need to know this and bring our children and say, listen, this is what it is. You need to ask the question, how can somebody walk around with 15 different PhDs and don't even know what the hell is going on campuses that she's supposed to be the chief executive of? All right? And could you or I do it? No. All right, so it tells you it ain't about how much you know. It's about skin privilege and who you got the power with. Morality has nothing to do with it. The Irish discovered that early on. The Italians discovered it. So as the guy goes on the book that says, and by 1940, the Italians got tired of playing second fiddle to the Irish. So this Irish guy, Harry Perry, became elected chief of Tammany Hall. So a guy, Molinari, told a couple of his Italian henchmen, say, go pay him a visit and see if you can convince him that it's time for him to step down. And these 2 dudes went to his office, and they walked in, and they stood up, and while they were talking to them, they pulled back their coats, and y'all know what was showing, right? Huh?
The Bible.
Yeah, that's thank you. That's correct. Brilliant. That's the real Bible. The real Bible. Thank you so much, brother. The real Bible. And Perry became a convert to Christianity, to meaningful Christianity right there. He says, I see your point, I resign. All right? Now bear in mind, they didn't go out and say, we got the numbers, let's go and get 500 more, 5,000 more votes. They took 2 guys and 2 guns. And the willingness to die, of course, and just walked in and said, it's time for you to step down. Yeah, you've taken on now. No, we don't want you giving us no part of this anymore. We have the numbers, and you step down. And of course, he said, no problem. This is probably the first example in modern times of somebody making an offer that he couldn't refuse. And these were the real godfathers, right? Now, the question wasn't about methodology, was it? Was it? It was about power. So again, so the name gets switched. So when you saw these guys sitting up there and they saw all of this evidence proving that the historical Jesus obviously had to be like the people in this room, all you got to do is look where the hell he came from. But then European folks are miraculous people. They can go all over the world. They can invent writing before they even know writing exists. You know, they do things like that. And then they go back and they civilize you. But in any event, when it became clear that the evidence pointed overwhelming to this, the argument, then people started calling in saying, Well, after all, what difference does it make what his color was? We asked him for the spiritual thing. Watch the game. His color, it don't matter what his color was. Well, if it don't matter what his color was, why the hell did Leonardo da Vinci paint him white to begin with? Why couldn't you just left him with his dark skin and his tight curly hair? For 500 years, it's mattered to you until we discovered a scam. When we discovered the scam, oh, that ain't important. I mean, that's a small thing. You know, it's the spiritual Christ. So then you sit and you look at that, and you have to ask yourself certain things. The word Christ is not a proper name. It's not even a title. It describes a process. It comes from the Greek word Christo or chrism, meaning an anointing. Right? This is what it is. You know, when you say, when a person who has been anointed, this was the way we use the symbolic of baptism. But that came out of simple thing of anointing. So when you said Jesus, which meant like leader, and then the term Christ was put as a title, meant the anointed one. So now when you call yourself Christian, that's also a contradiction in terms. Are you saying, in effect, well, I belong to the group of anointed ones? Well, if you belong to the groups of anointed ones nominally, what the hell are you having baptism for? You know, that's taken care of with your birth. Logically, if you're going to go, you can't have it both ways. But when that thing came down at the end, when the blacks there started talking about St. Martin de Porres and the Black Madonna of Poland, the Chief Madonna and whatnot, at that point, you could see that Mr. Donahue said, I had enough of this shit. You know, he went to several more commercials right behind us, about 5 of them in a row. Bang, 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 and we came back. Thank you so much. Our wardrobe for the day. Bye. Yeah, we very interesting. Bye. Am I lying? And now the same techniques, to the extent they can use it, trying to be used at Jefferson. But the problem is, as far as the thing, they got some dumbasses who they're supposed to be starring. And I mean, I'm not kidding you. I don't say this with no malice. As you will see toward the end, this is exactly where we're coming from. Now, if you can make that connection between the reasons for this changes here in this Bible, it is all connected in exactly the same way. Taking something that ain't something, doing a razzle-dazzle, and turning it around. You need to ask yourselves, not so much is the Bible the Word of God. That doesn't concern us. I'm perfectly willing. I grew up in a Southern Black Baptist family, and I am culturally a Southern Black Baptist. When I go to church on Sunday, I go for music, and I go to get that spirituality, and I go back home in them backwoods, and you know, and all them people sitting out there, and them collard greens going around the church, and Junior, you home, man, it's a movable feast. But that's our religion. I don't get that same thing if I go to St. Thomas Episcopal Church, or if I go to St. Patrick's. You know, I walk in them places, and I feel uncomfortable. They don't have no sister in the corner saying, hey, man, you know, it's a movable feast with us. It ain't about serving God only, it's about a spiritual thing. And when we work like hell in them cotton fields and them tobacco fields and them cane patches, Sunday was the only day that we could come out and express something and get some kind of regeneration to go back and face that hell from for another week down there in them islands back down. So we did this not so much as affirmation of the Spirit of God, but affirmation of trying to survive another week. And we need to understand. So we have to put these things in perspective. The concept of black Christianity as it came out of Africa, and now when they corrupted it and handed it back to us, they had of course corrupted white, but what we did with it, being African people, and I don't have to give you no proof of that, we took it and redefined it again. Out of this came the spirituals, the gospel, and to prove how monkey see, monkey do, they now have what do you call them funny things they do about music awards at the air? They got a white gospel category now that they give award for. White gospel. Well, it is an oxymoron. That's precisely. The term white and gospel is a contradiction in itself. You know? but they think they sound like you. You know? So now once I have said there's a category of white gospel, and I give some yo-yo or yo-yo-ette $100,000 reward and a gold record, I have ipso facto now and created a whole new thing, and it's true because I said so. Exactly the way they create new Bibles or new definitions. Because you're talking fundamentally about political controls and methods of change. When the dynamics of rule change, then the politics of whatever it is you use to keep people in line has to change. In other words, there was not a King James authorized revision until a political need came for it. It didn't come because one day King James got up and said, you know, I think I'd like to have me another Bible. King James didn't give a damn about the Bible. All he was concerned primarily about was where he was going to have his next homosexual relationship. You know, well, hey, I don't deal with it. I don't have no problem. People have whatever sexual preference they want. But these are the same people that tells you that homosexuality is a sin. Says so right here in this Bible this man had. Let me just tie something in for you. I know my folks. No, never go nowhere with an empty gun. Some of y'all may be aware of this book, Dirt. If you ain't, you ought to be. Right in here that tells us about the great King James. And what it says about this great man. Well, listen, it ain't my description. It's the way the man lived. Let me see if I can find it. I thought I had marked it, but just give me a minute. Don't run away, because y'all came all this distance. And yeah, 119. It tells you here clearly about the dirt and the filth. I read this last week, but I want to redo it again so you can get a sense of what this man was. Let's look at the brother James. We have him here. 79, page 70. Yeah. Yeah. Chapter 7. That unspeakable puddle of a time. Thus Thomas Carlyle in his letters and speeches of Oliver Cromwell vented his apparently limitless capacity for misanthropy on the whole of the Jacobean age. We're talking now the 17th century. James came to power in 1603 on the death of his cousin Elizabeth. And of course, now, I know some of y'all ain't gonna like this, but I can't help it. Now, it said, like most of Carlyle's judges is grossly unfair. From whatever angle we look at the 17th century, and whichever public scandals or abuses we select as evidence of its unpleasantness, there are parallels in this and other ages. It was a time of political intrigue and unrest. Does that sound familiar to you? It lurched into a civil war and religious strife. You see the semantics? When white folks kill each other, it's not that they went and bashed it, they lurched into it. You know, he was just going down the road, and all of a sudden, the car lurched like what happened when you involuntarily step on the gas, and it lurched forward without anybody willing it to do so. So they lurched into war. You got to watch these semantics. These folks are something else. The English language, let me tell you, is a bitch. You hear me? And you better learn as much about it as you can. And that's another reason for you to look at that trial very well, because again, it's all laid out there. All you got to do is tie in. What he says, it lurched into civil war and religious strife. However, the Civil War was less damaging than the outbreaks of gang warfare called the Wars of the Roses. That's a new appellation. Yes, gang warfare. All warfare is gang warfare. You don't fight wars by individually. You think wars fought by trial by combat? They're all fought by gangs, and they're bloody and they're murderous. Now, the religious quarrels less bloody than those surrounding Mary and Elizabeth Tudor. But one consideration, as you go on to say, it was a time of stealing and jobbing. But what period is not? It has a name for loose and sexual morality. But for the mass of people, the pattern remained the same for an age before and after the Jacobean period. Illegitimacy was rare, but last-minute marriages was the rule. It was a race to see who was going to get there first, the priest or the people with the baby. It was a dirty age, among others just as dirty. They're not talking about Africans now here. I'm talking about your wonderful superior European, the first people who invented the term dirty nigger. All right? All right. But one consideration lends point to Carlyle's disgust. King James himself, the man who gave us this beautiful authorized version here. England has had weak kings, foreign kings, and lazy kings in plenty. It has also had pompous and self-vaunting kings. Unfortunately, in James I of England and VI of Scotland, the weakness and the belief in the divine right of kings were combined in grotesque concert. His extraordinary belief in his own superhuman powers only emphasized his sadly human shortcomings. And here's a quote from somebody contemporary. His beard was very thin, his tongue too large for his mouth, and made him drink very uncommonly, meaning he made a lot of noise when he's trying to swallow, as if eating his drink, which came out into the cup on each side of his mouth. His skin was as soft as taffet sarcenet, which felt so because lice and him, and he never washed his hands. Neither did he wash his behind. I put the behind there, right? Only, and this is somebody talking who knew him, only rubbed his finger in slightly with the wet end of a napkin. His legs were very weak, having had, it was thought, seen some foul play in his youth, or rather before he was born. That he was not able to stand at 7 years of age, that weakness made him ever leaning on other men's shoulders. His walk was ever circular, his fingers ever in that walk fiddling about like his codpiece. He went on to say, his manners, as a result of the failure to instruct him properly, are aggressive and uncivil, both in speaking, eating, clothes, and conversations. He goes on to note that he combined his graceless outward appearance with other more fundamental weaknesses. He was the irritating type of homosexual who insists on promiscuous public embraces. Sorry about that. Directed to any attractive young man in his reach. Fortunately says cautiously that one of his defects is, quote, that he loves inexactly and obstinately, as long as they are young men. Sir Henry Wotton, writing a confidential dispatch for the Grand Duke of Tuscany, says, and I quote, he is very familiar with his domestics and gentlemen of the chamber. But then the other Francis says he's more explicit, and he draws attention to another unpleasant effect of that tongue which was too large for the mouth. That he would go over and proposition young men for something that is known in Latin as fellatio. I have heard that Sir Henry Rich, who the king made the Earl of Holland, and some others refused his Majesty's favor. I said the English language is something else, and then refused his favor. Upon those conditions they subscribed to, who filled that place in his affection. Rich losing that opportunity to be the king's lover, his curious face and complexion afforded him by turning aside and spitting after the king had slobbered in his mouth. Now I ask you, now I don't argue that maybe somebody who is homosexual or whatever cannot sit and they come to the book, but then we have to look, given this man's habits, and these are contempt, given his habits, and when you consider how the Protestant church today is all over kicking homosexuals out and whatnot, how do we account for it? How, you see, nowadays that's why they want you to take things on faith. You know, how do you describe King James? Are you saying, well, he was excused because he's a king? They ain't supposed to make them exceptions, are they? But on top of the other arrogance, he also considered himself a theological expert. And that is why, so when the question of why, with all, at that time there was about 25 or 30 different Bibles already in existence, then I think you would be well justified in asking, why another? Then we have to look at the politics of the time. We have to look at what was happening all throughout Europe. We have to look at the rationale of what was needed. We have to look at the struggle between the various so-called Christian sects. And then we see, as he stated, I'm having all of these problems here. Catholics fighting this and all the other stuff. And each one declaring, basing their right on this Bible or that chapter, that chapter. He tells Francis Bacon and them to come and sit down, and you got a year to come up with a Bible that I can live with, and I want this Bible to deal with all of the things politically. In other words, what he's saying, I want a Bible that can help me rule. A Bible that people can read and which will tell him, servant, obey your master and don't ever cross the king. The king is next to God. And what was it he said? He wanted to prove what? The divine right of kings. So if I have a Bible, which I call a holy book, which so states that, and remember, less than 1% of people could read anyway. Most people got their knowledge of Bibles secondhand by those who can read. So all you had to do was say the divine right of kings. I have been, here's that chrism thing again, anointed, and being anointed by the priesthood. And as I said to you earlier, they work hand in glove, the priesthood, the kings, and the bankers. All of them work, and the governors. The king tells you what to do. The church rubber stamps it. The priest say if you don't do it, you go into hell. And the banker keeps your butt poor so you don't have no other options. So we ain't talking nothing here that has to do about religion and spirituality. Pure, down-to-earth politics. Control. Whatever will give me the most, how shall I put it, the most effective manner of controlling these yo-yos. Because they're a bunch of louts anyhow. And this man has got all this power, as I told you before, that he smells so bad. They say, Lord, I hate when the king sends a command performance for me to come. That's in this book. King James is 6 and yeah, you got to go down a lot of road. This lady says here, yes, let me read you. She was invited to dinner with the great King James. This is Lady Anne Clifford. Says James' tastes were less extravagant than those of many of his courtiers, but his wish to appear wealthy and magnificent expressed itself in a fondness for wearing jewels, plus, of course, limp wristband, on which he spent large sums of money. Guess whose money that was he was spending? It's called taxpayers in our time. All right? At a banquet to honor the French ambassador in 1603, and I'm quoting, His Majesty made a vast display of plate on his person, a wealth of jewels. Yet his grandeur was accompanied by a personal uncleanliness that offended his new subjects, themselves not dainty in matters of soap and water. Now, if you doubt this, a Caucasian wrote this, an Englishman, by the way. All right? Right? Quote, "We all saw a great change between the fashion of the court as it is now and of that in the Queen's time." That would be Elizabeth, the cousin who preceded him. Wrote Lady Anne Clifford, "For we were all lousy by sitting in the chamber of Sir Thomas with the King." And there were comments upon the filth of James' personal habits that passed far beyond the possibilities of Baudelaires' explosion. And this lady goes on to say she went to this ball, and the king insisted on dancing with her. Well, in those days, off with your head was serious business. I mean, that wasn't just an expression. I mean, before, if the king said off with your head, before he could say I'm kidding, 15 people would have cut it off immediately. And she goes on to say that the kings did smell so abominably, and it took them a great amount of time to get clean, because he had this paranoid fear, as I said earlier, of being assassinated, which I would consider not paranoid, because in those days, you know the expression Shakespeare, heavy lies the head that wears the crown. Now that wasn't just bullshit. I mean, some cases England had like 5 kings in less than 5 months, and not one of them died in bed, and they didn't die fighting war, including one dude, Edward II, and I just tell you apocryphally if you think it's crazy, who also was homosexual. The Plantagenets had a long career of this kind of thing. They would only go to bed with their wives to make an heir when forced to. And Edward II had a guy called Plonsman, and he spent so much time with him that his wife Isabel took on a lover, and they practically took over the palace. And they finally, Isabel them said, why would I stay with this guy? Let's take the whole throne. So one night when Eddie was down asleep, they moved in on him, and they tied him down on the bed, strapped down, with his legs spread apart. They took a cow horn, sawed the end of it off, and shoved the small end up his rectum as far as it would go, and then took a red-hot poker, and took a red-hot poker and shoved it up his body through that horn, and burned literally his inside out, so you could hear him screaming all over the palace. Now the whole purpose of the horn was that no burns would show around the outside of his rectum. So those folks did not play, and we thought they were cruel to us. They had plenty of practice before they ever knew we existed, right? So when you look at the way that this man was, and he had this fear that he was going to be assassinated. So what he did, he had special clothes made that was all rubberized. He looked like one of them big clowns, you see the hat, like that. And he wore 6 inches of rubberized clothing that was padded, about 3 inches of padding on each side. Now, I just told you that he never bathed. And as was said here also, he never changed his clothes. Take my word for it. It was commented that he wore his clothes until they fell off in rags. And he said he didn't want to waste no money. Hey, but he's the king. Yeah, not most of the people, most European folks. Yeah, we didn't do that. Yeah. But in any event, because soap is another one of our inventions. That's one of the main reasons they were looking to get trade with Africa. But in any event, to top it off, he drank a lot of ale because he thought ale was healthy for him. Now, I don't drink beer ale, but I'm not a drinker, but I'm told that ale, like beans and peas, are extremely gas producing. Now, if you can imagine hey, this is the history. If you can imagine this guy padded like this, he's got to walk like this, and he's done all this around, right? And he drank a gallon of ale every day. So you can imagine what happened as you see him turn a corner down by Broad and Market Street. And people here started running for Newark Airport. You got it right. All right? All right? And that's okay. You're right. Here's what the lady said. Let me just read you the passage. She said you're absolutely correct. Because they said here quickly, the English people of this time was not known. Yeah, the English people at that time was not known for their fondness for soap and water. And when I was in Europe and the army service in World War II, I found that very little had changed. If you go there today, even in villages, you find they have one central water place where people go. Now, the water is used for cooking, drinking, but they prefer ale or beer. Now, the thing that got me, that's why it is true that travel will broaden your mind. I'm tying this because this is the land of the people who gave us this. So it's their values that we are projecting. And when I went to England and I knew about this British Empire garbage, and I went out in the country and I saw big, because this is wartime, and all of these huge mansions, 50 and 100 rooms, sitting up there empty, because the lords of the manor had moved into London or Bristol, you know, because it was rough out there, blackouts, no food. But they left their retainers, the peasants and the plow people, back there. And it was amazing to me, they'd have a long, the barn was about from here down to that third post. 3 rooms running right across railroad flat. Now don't ask me why they did this. Up front was the bedroom. The middle room was where the cows, the hogs, the horses, the chickens, and all the other farm animals, they ate and they slept with the shit and everything else there. The back room was the kitchen or the general room where everybody sat when they came home from work and ate. So you can see what I'm saying. When you finished your dinner at night and you got ready to retire, you walked through animal shit, right, the middle room to get into your bedroom. Now ain't no bathroom in there. So if there's no bathroom in there, if you didn't have no basin and some water, how the hell did it when you went to bed with shitty feet? And I guess this was done on the theory that even if you wash the shit off your feet, the next morning when you go in the kitchen to go to work, you got to walk back through shit again. So I guess they figured there was no point in wasting energy. Right? And I watch British presence of people like we would say down home, where the uniform would be brogan shoes, what we call a jumper, a denim jacket, and overalls and stuff, which was practical work clothes. But these dudes wore boots, strap boots, black buckle shoes, which they shine with lamp black. They took soot out of the chimney and mixed it with lard, and that's how they shine their shoes. And they went to the field, these big Clydesdale horses that you see in Budweiser advertised. That's where the big Clydesdale horses, with these huge hoofs. And you would see this farmer, as I said, he got up the next morning, walked through the chicken shit, the hog shit, whatnot, went and ate his breakfast, had his clothes on, then he put on his shoes, boots, and he went and he got his horse out and his plow, and he may be going down again, say, Broad Market Street or wherever, Washington. He's going down there, which may be a couple of miles, and you see him walking down the road, leading this horse and this plow, and he's got on these, what do you call them, yard purse thing, them khaki pants that you put in the boots. And are you ready for this? A tweed jacket. He's going in the field to plow. A tweed jacket and the pièce de résistance, a cravat, otherwise known as a tie. Now the tie may be greasy and about to fall off, and you know, it looks like you could cook on it and whatnot. And he had them patches on the sleeve. But this, now where is he going? He's going in the field to plow. What does this tell you about the mentality of these people that enslaved us? Huh? Now, if you have that kind of mentality, and you're on the bottom rung of society. You see why it was so easy for these people to come up and put something out here and say, this is the political system. No questioning it, because you are watching this. Now, what do you think happens when they stumble out in the rest of the world, or to Africa, or here, with that kind of mentality? And now, you ain't plowing no more. You got some real live human beings that you can abuse or beat up or kick up. Chancellor of the City University of New York, W. Ann Reynolds, is one of those folks. She is an old-line wasp. I'm saying to you, the whole process of what happened. Let me just give you a break, going back, and I'm going to read from you the first breaks of how the Bible broke down. Because if I don't do this, I'll have a problem with... what's your name? Who you? Let's look at it. Definition, Bible. I've given you the book where it's come from, right? Definition. The book made up of writings accepted by Christians as inspired by God and of divine authority. What did King James of England say his power come from? Divine authority. Now, let's go to the second one, and I'll break that down for you. The scriptures, including the Old and New Testaments, a pre-Christian Greek translation is known as the Septuagint. Septu, S-E-P-T-U-A-G-I-N, meaning 70 in Latin. And the reason it is called the Septuagint, because that particular Bible with Greek use, they claim that it was put together. Now remember what I just told you about King James and his scholarship. They claim that 70 scholars, that's what the Greeks to this day claim, and the Russian, they claim that 70 scholars put this Bible together, which they are using. Are you ready for this? 270 years before the birth of Christ. What you're saying is, you put this book together before there was any Christianity. That's why the question, hey, it ain't my rules, it ain't my history. That's why, as I said earlier, when you talk about, they can't even agree on when Jesus was born. Some say 10 AD or 10 years BC or anything in between. They can't agree on when he died, how long he lived, or what he worked at. Some say he was a carpenter. Others say this or that other. There's no agreement. Therefore, everybody it's a do-it-yourself thing. They were able to create their own Jesus. And it's logical to me why Europeans, why the Pope, you thought I was going to forget, Sixtus told Michelangelo when he painted the Sistine Chapel to depict Christ as being white, blonde, and blue-eyed. Now the irony in that is, we're looking at another schism here, politically. Alexander VI was Italian. Why would an Italian Pope want a blonde, blue-eyed Christ? Then we have to go look at, you see, every road opens up other doors. You got to go look at the early history of Italy. Not the Italy we know it today. The Italians still have a saying, and I've quoted to you before, but I'll repeat it to you for remembrance, that everything south of Rome is Africa. And if you get on a train near the Cisalpine Alps, on the Italian side of the Alps, and book a passage going south to Naples, you will see clearly what is meant by this. Milan, Genoa, all the northern Italian places, you look at the people, red-haired, freckle faces, ruddy skins and complexion. Once we get to Naples, which is about to say, all of a sudden something happened. You can look at people looking like people in this room, right? And they get darker and darker until you get down to Naples. When you get to the Bay of Naples, you cross over to Sicily, you're already been in Africa 500 miles. So when we look at Sixtus, at that time, the Southern Italian were treated like we are treated today. They were looked upon as not even being Italians. Therefore, no self-respecting pope. None of them had any high positions in the church. They were all just peasants, a little above slaves. That's how the mafia got started, as a protest movement against the exploitation of the peasants by their landlord. So when Sixtus asked for a blonde, blue-eyed Christ, he wasn't talking about Southern Italians. He was talking about the people of Milano, the people of Este, the Este family, the aristocracy that had ruled him, and these people were descended from the Swabians, the Germans, and there was one group of Normans who went into Ireland from the 7th century through the 12th century, or about the 14th century. The Normans was kicking butt and taking names all over Europe. The word Normandy, which stretches down meaning Northmen, came from the Vikings who came out of Norway in the 7th century, conquered part of France, and then made a deal finally that they would keep that part, but the name Normandy really means Northmen. Then there was another bunch of them that went across and conquered Ireland and founded Dublin. Well, we know people don't know that. Then another branch went and took Naples, the king of Naples, and of course the other ones in the north ruled northern Italy for over 300 years. So when you're looking at the northern Italians, you're not looking at our cousins, whether they admit it or not. These are just facts. But you're looking at the other Europeans. So when Sixtus told Michelangelo what he wanted, he was putting up a reflection, in effect, of himself. When Da Vinci did his thing of the Last Supper, I don't know it's true, but other people said that he picked his sister and one of the people was a convict. There's no be no problem with that, because you don't look at the values in today's, from our point of today. But I'm only making the case that it has always been customary throughout history until it came down to Moses and Mosetta in modern times. All people have created or recreated deities in their own image. We are the only ones that's been handed a deity, which we created Christianity, and then brought and corrupted and handed back to us in a corrupt form, and then put this white God up on the can. No other people does this. Now, you've had inroads of Christianity in China, in Korea, and many of these other places, but fundamentally, the religion of the area remains what the indigenous religion was. Most of the indigenous people here now are going back. One of the big fights they're getting is getting back their artifacts and stuff, and sacred items which these people have took and stuck in museums. So there's this whole thing. The only people that I know in modern times in conservation who are not doing this en masse is folks that look like us in this room. And I find that one of the reasons for that, I'm not blaming my people, I'm just describing facts, is it's very difficult for somebody to teach you something that you don't want to hear. And there's this tendency to hold on to something you know. And we'll question each other. How do you know this? You'd be surprised some of the simple-ass questions that people ask me. Did you write the book? They'll pick up this book. Let me see that book, Professor. Where's that page you looking at? And this is what they do. Look at it. Turn it this way. Is you sure that's the truth? No. Another of you might want to, this is a book you might consult with Prophet. Jesus Through the Century. And it deals with a whole lot of concept of how various cultures have seen this deity. And of course the other problem is, how does one change a man philosopher into a semi-godhead, and we call that religion, right? Yet we look at the problem where the Greeks, I usually had this concept of the centaur, the half man, half horse. And we say that's absurd. Why? If you can accept the concept of three bodies in one, or then you can accept the concept of hermaphroditism, of male and female existing in the same form. The problem with so-called Christianity, as I see it is the most vindictive, has been historically the most vindictive, the most mean-spirit, and the most vicious of all, I mean in a sustained way, of all the religions that I am aware of that have existed at time. It is the only one that I know that will convert people and still ostracize them, which of course is what's happened to us. All other religions that I'm aware of, once the convert accepts the principle of conversion, you accept the gods, if you will, the hand of fellowship is traditionally extended to them. Let me give you an example. Even so-called Christianity itself was the recipient of this. Let me look at you from where I'm going. Now watch what I said to you. First change. First 5 Bibles. Again. The Septuagint. Now this was a Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek version of the New Testament. Not the standard thing we call Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Their version. Which meant you lower in and you pick out what don't fit. I don't like this. You throw it out and you come up with a revision. Now, the Septuagint, then of course this is the book, the version that they used to begin with. But the first of the old Biblios that we're aware of was the one that was translated from Hebrew into Greek. And then later, St. Jerome, Geronimus, who, because he wasn't Cyrone, they changed his name because he was a Slav. He became the first scholar in the 4th century A.D. when it was decided to codify and come up with a system of books. Jerome then said the way we are going to spread this to get the common people, watch where I'm going now, listen to the term, common people, to buy this, we must come out with a Bible. Watch all these revisions now. With a Bible that is simple enough, because after all, most common people couldn't read or read very poorly. So we need a simple book. The language of the people, the lingua franca, if you will, of the people in the 4th century was, of course, Latin. So when St. Jerome did his translation from the Septuagint, combining again aspects of the Hebrew and the Greek, he came up with something called the Vulgate, V-U-L-G-A-T-E, which comes when we say vulgar. He's a vulgar person. All vulgar really means is common. So meaning a book for the common people. Therefore, when you come something with the common people, certain things you look and say, well, they don't need to know this because this, not having this in here is not going to affect their faith, etc. And I want them to have faith and I want them to get away with it. So, bam, here we go now. We've got 3. Then, here comes, now, then we go from that. From that Bible, if you're still following me, from that Bible, when the schism came between Catholicism and the so-called Protestant Reformation, now you got to split again, don't you? Can't use the same Bible. So the Catholics took from there, that became what we now know today as the Douay Bible. The Protestants had various other words until James comes along. We had, each one had a hand at it. When we get into the 16th century, the early part of the 16th century, we have the problem of paying of indulgences, which had become widespread corruption in the Catholic Church. And bear in mind at that time, there was, when you didn't have to say Catholic because there was only one church that was Catholic. And you know the story of Martin Luther in 1517, who nails his 95 Theses up to the cathedral at Worms, where he accuses the hierarchy of all of these corrupt practices, and thereby, according to them, started the Protestant Reformation. Well, that is a bit like most things they're doing. It's a bit not true, because the stirrings had been going long before then. Let's say Martin Luther was the first one that was able to get a following large enough. So what I'm saying on another level, a lot of what is considered orthodox don't have a damn thing to do with whether your Bible is more accurate than my Bible. It really comes down to power. In other words, when you look at, I think it's ironic to look at that history, what we now call Christianity, and you know that for the first 4 centuries of its existence, they were living in caves, being fed to lions and shot everything else, because they were the weak one that didn't have numbers. What happened once Constantine the Great, so-called, converted to Christianity in the latter half of the 4th century? He didn't convert because he suddenly saw a light in the heavens and said, I have sinned, save me. He looked and he could count. Simple as that. Yeah, he was a good census taker. And when you look out there and say, I've been kicking these people in the ass for 300 years, and they keep coming, and something's be out there, and time is running out. So he says, okay, for political reasons, I will, of course, now once, remember at that time, the term used in Latin was something called religio sanguinis or religio principe. In other words, the religion of a country or a province was stated as being the religion of what the ruler was. So if the ruler was Catholic, it didn't matter what the peasant believed. The ruler was Catholic, it's a Catholic country. And if you didn't say you were Catholic, what happened to you? So what did you learn to do very quickly? If you didn't convert, even if you wasn't seen, well, I'm a Catholic. If you got caught in a Protestant country, the next day I'm a Protestant. So you found these people, you must understand this very much today, they were jumping back and forth just like them people in Bosnia. And you see they're playing these damn games again. It's got nothing to do with ethnic cleansing. All of them people is living there are Slavs. The issue ain't ethnicity. They all belong to the same ethnic group. What then is the issue? Religion. The Croats are Russian Orthodox. The Serbs are Roman Catholics. The Bosnians and the Herzegovinians are Muslim, which is a no-no in Europe given their history of the last 500. They've been Muslim 500 all over Albania. You know this. Romania, Albania, Bulgaria. Bulgaria has just decreed that 150,000 ethnic Turks who have been in Bulgaria since 500 years, since the 15th century with the Turkish, with the Muslim March, don't speak a word of Turkish, ain't never been to Turkey. Don't know nobody in Turkey, ain't got no family there. The Bulgar says, get the hell out. Go back where you came from. But I came, no, you didn't come down the road. But I don't speak Turkish. Hey, ain't my problem. No. You're a Turk, you came here kicking butt and taking names, it's taken me 500 years, and you got to go. I don't see Clinton them getting up ready to go fight war, because the issue is the Muslims are no-no. They belong to that group of people that's been now designated as demons, or the designated villain. Domestically, we are the designated villains. That is why, as I said to you before, there's a parallel between the treatment of us and Dr. Jeffries and our scholars, just as with Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. Do not mistake it. And what is happening in Somalia. Nobody asked them in Somalia. They just jumped in and started kicking butt. But these are white folks. When you see blonde and blue-eyed Muslims, that blows these folks' mind. So they have to sit back and look at this. But the interesting thing is, while they're calling you and me violent, they're saying we're going to drop some bombs. Non-violently, of course. Yeah, you know. So when you look at these parallels, you see these same things going on here. The next step in this phase then, the Dewey Bible, then we come to the period where finally King James comes up with this, tells his scholars to sit down and come up with the Bible he can live with. The first two versions, as I told you before, he didn't find satisfactory because he considered himself a an expert on theology. On what basis, we don't know. Of course, divine right of kings, of course. And he told him, you come back the next time, you better have a Bible I can live with. Otherwise, your head's going to be going. So in 1611, they came up with this quote-unquote version he could live, the authorized King James Version, who did not write it and couldn't even read it. But the important thing, so now what do you think? What is this Bible then? It is a mishmash of many other Bibles that had gone before, plus new interpretations of things. Therefore, and it's been revised according to my sense. Let me just give you an example. There's a translation of the New Testament, which is now current in the United States, used by Roman Catholics. That's the Douay. The Authorized Version, or King James Bible, published in 1611, and its revisions. The Revised Version in English, 1885. American Standard Revised Version, otherwise called the American Standard, completed in 1901. They are the chief translations in the Protestant use. The Revised Standard Version of the New Testament only. A revision of the American Revised Version appeared in 1946. Right? Certain books, or parts of books which are in the Vulgate, but which are omitted from the Protestant version of the Old Testament because they're not found in the Hebrew sections. So the revisions keep going on. Now those, and they run to 20 books, we call those books the Apocrypha. And that means hidden, a Greek meaning hidden, meaning there wasn't nothing hidden about it. At one time, they were in various editions of these Bibles. A new political power comes in and says, I don't want that. That doesn't fit me. This is controversial. Out it goes. Now, most of the people that they were using this thing to control could not read any of them. Who then was the final authority in interpreting to the mass of people what was orthodoxy? Who took that job? The priest. Therefore, the priesthood had to politically and culturally be in cahoots with the powers that be. Therefore, you be deaf, dumb, blind, and stupid to assume that any church hierarchy is going to desert the power structure to come along with the peasants. If there's enough pressure, they'll go a certain distance, but not that far. Because now when you go right back and you find out very quickly, at the beginning, when the first Vulgate was written, it's put together. When Constantine decided to adopt Christianity officially, and I ask you, today is December 31st, and everybody in this room are pagans. January 1st, New Year's Day tomorrow, I announce as the emperor, everybody here is Christian now. Has your beliefs changed? No. No, the only thing that's going to change is your behavior. Huh? Very quickly. Because you say, oh shit, here we go again. Now here comes the king's minions going around reading decrees. Everybody had better be a Christian by midnight tonight, or else. And you can hear the roar of the lions. And the man comes around and knocks. Any pagans in here? No, sir. Ain't nobody here but us Christians. But they were willing to make certain concessions. Realizing people being what they are, you can't change the ritual overnight, so they included a whole lot of the pagan gods into the church, and they became saints. Yeah, just snap your finger. You can do that when you got power, right? So when you follow this, when you talk about the Bible, you have to understand, you ask, how could Christianity as, if you will, as a movement, It existed for over 300 years with no written guidebook at all. How did the faithful then watch it? They took again from the leadership of the church. And that brings us to what I promised my friend to look at the greatest, in my view, the greatest propagandist of them all, Paul of Tarsus, who on the road to Damascus, according to him, and we have to take his word because there was no other witnesses so far as I know, the cloud, this clap came out, kaboom, bam, and he fell down and he says, "I hear you, boss." Now, he was kicking Jews' butt and persecuting Christians and all the rest of it, but he had this great vision and snapped the fingers and says, "Okay, man, when I get up here, I'm a changed man." Now, that's his version. And then he also realized, up until that time, Christianity had been one of many Jewish sects. They say, we're going to prevail. We got to internationalize this thing. Let me go preach to the Gentile. I got all these connections out here. And he used what we would call his network. And he became the great propagandist. Peter, of course, was the organizer who first sold the idea of Christ's immortality. Even after he said, "I don't know the dude, but hey, you know, it's a small thing." His butt was on the line, so you can understand that. But when you look at these two cases, you see clearly there has been this pattern that follows this very day. There was never a change in any Bible until the politics changed. When the politics changed, another great pivotal thing, as I said to you earlier, was, of course, Henry VIII, who told the Pope, "You're interfering with a woman I want to go to bed with. I don't want you telling me about I'm married." You can't do that. If you do that, I'll excommunicate you. So go ahead, excommunicate. I excommunicate you out the kingdom of England. I'm the boss here. Took all the monasteries, robbed them, cleaned them up, took the money, ain't give them back yet. Nobody called them thieves. Martin Luther with the other schism, Lutheranism, all of these isms. So when you look at this, and summation, because we want to show the other thing for you, European Christianity has been one long continuous slaughter. One long continuous slaughter that is still going on in the process. We go quickly from Martin Luther and the 95 Theses celebrating Lutheranism. This entered a clash with the Catholics coming back with a counter-reformation and the slaughter into the 17th century. You have from 1618 to 1648, 30-year war. 1337 to 1453, the 130-year war between England and France over what? Who was the rightful king on earth? Thank you. From 1155 until today, Henry II goes into Ireland, gets the approval of Adrian IV, who was the only English-born pope to ever sit on a papal throne, and gets him to okay an invasion of Ireland on the grounds that the Irish are not Christians. That's been 838 years. Elizabeth goes in 400 years later and slaughters them because they were too good at Catholics. Historically, it was the Irish who Christianized the English. When we move, the next thing we see about the middle of the 15th century, here comes Jean Calvin, or Chauvin, who 15th, 17th century Inquisition, which I've touched on here at another level, of burning people up for their own good, for their souls. And at every stage, the rationale behind it was some version of the Bible. Let me, if I may, just to sign up with this. Some of you may be familiar with this. What I have in my hands are the 14 books of the Apocrypha. These are the books that all of them, the lost books, the forgotten books and whatnot, that they, for one reason, political reason or another, took out. Either Protestant, Catholic, or somebody said they don't fit in with my preconceived section. Some of them may sound familiar to you, but let me just give you okay? I'll just run these off for you so you'll be aware of them. The first book of Esdras, that's E-S-D-R-A-S, which is the Douay way of saying Ezra. Okay? The second book of Esdras, the book of Tobit. How many of y'all heard of these books? T-O-B-I-T. The book of Judith. Then the rest of the chapters of the book of Esther, which are found neither in the Hebrew nor the Chaldean text. So the book of Esther, which you are according to, is not, nobody say it ain't complete. Then you have another edition, the Wisdom of Solomon. And now, the wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach, or Ecclesiasticus. All of these were chapter and books versions that were in one or another of these Bibles coming down that were ultimately clipped out. The book of Baruch, and that in Hebrew, Baruch means blessed. The song of the three holy children. The history of Susanna. The history of the destruction of Bel and the dragon, B-E-L. The prayers of Manasseh, king of Judah. The first book of the Maccabees. The second book of the Maccabees. Now, I want to caution you that all of this Apocrypha did not come out of the various Bibles at once. A political situation developed that for one reason or another, not only this, sometimes they were not only just taken out, but there were other versions where they went back and got some of them and added them back. Now, I want to tie something in with you just to give you a listing. I don't want to bore you, but to bring home to you dramatically of the game, how we are being constructed to look at one small part of a globe. World religions, from ancient history to the present. While all of this was going on, which people are focusing on in terms of the European world, let's just give a quick listing of some of the beliefs that this world of ours are still today part of. Some you are familiar with, but we tend to be only familiar with those religions which belong to a large group of people. The irony of the history of most religions is when you're a small group, you're different, they kick your butt and try to destroy you. You get to be a little larger, they accommodate to live with you. You get big enough, you take over the system. In this country, we've had the question, as you know, with them, the Puritans, who of course were the Calvinists, and then Congregationalists, as they say now, as outsiders and persecuted. The wars, the religious wars in England between the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. The Cavaliers, all the Catholic regularly wore long hair. It's important, one time we need to do something on the history of hairstyles, or the role of hairstyles in history. The Protestants or the Puritans wore shaved heads, so they called them Roundheads. Now these are wars between Christian sects. Then came the Quakers. The Moravians, who we know here as the Pennsylvania Dutch. All right? The Mormons, who went on and took over 3 states. Once they got 3 states, they can marry how many times ever they want to. Right? And they are one of the most powerful political forces in the West. They still practicing polygamy. But guess what? Nobody sees it anymore because you can't mess with them now because they're big enough. That brings me to one other thing that I must touch on here, but just let me pass this. Here we've got prehistoric religion, tribal religions in Asia, early Australia, traditional African religion, Aztecs, Mayas, Andean, North European Iron Age, Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Iran, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Japan, Shintoism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. All of these are just some of the reasons, and these are religions that are still active in large parts of the world today. You don't hear of them. So that brings us into the last thing what I want to tie up with you, this whole business about cults. What is a cult? Yeah, what I just defined for you about when you're a small group and nobody in your cult. When you get big enough to actually have some power, you become a legitimate branch of some sect, whatever the hell it is. So the game of them people that they burned, and they didn't commit no suicide. I put my head on the block for that. Yeah, they burned them, and they intended to burn them because that's what these folks do. But you better believe the only reason that they were called cults was because they were small and had another thing. The other part about that is they claim alcohol tax, firearms claim, what I call brown skin service. This is a pause for dramatic effect. Y'all can breathe. They claim that they had observed this cult over a period of 2 years buying illegal arms. You've seen that. Guns and all the other stuff. And they had finally decided after 2 years it was time to move it on them. My question is this. How many of y'all in this room believe that the alcohol and tax and firearm people would observe a cult of your folks and my folks, obtaining, by whichever means, a so-called illegal arm, machine gun and stuff, and make notes of this for 2 years before they move in on us? And then waiting 51 days. And that's right. Not only that, I got to throw it. No, we don't know they killed him. That's what they say. All right. Remember, us of all people should never take. Remember Fred Hampton, the Panthers, where they claim that they killed these. Remember, they killed these young men in their beds and claimed, say, see, these are the holes where they shot at us. And some black reporter went and says, these are nail holes. All the bullets showed that all the bullets came from outside of the apartment, inside the apartment. How many people went to jail for that? How many people went to jail for bombing a move in Philadelphia? What about Tulsa in 1921? Or what about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment? My case closed. So when you look at this and you tie all these things together, we need to beware because a lot of things came out of this, and we're all urban people, living urban people here. As my grandma said, God don't like ugly and don't care too much about pretty. A lot of things people do, and they think they've been doing that. I've been mentioning in my lectures for the last 15 years, pulling people coat, and maybe you all in here know this, that all the armories in all the cities that I know that have large African populations have long since been storing tanks and half-tracks and other weapons and training for what they consider, we've talked about, as anti-guerrilla warfare. All for most that. I've had people look at me like I'm stupid. I'm going to ask y'all one thing, because I know y'all smart and y'all know more than me. How long has the FBI been a branch of the U.S. military? Anybody in here knew that? How long has the Federal Bureau of Investigation been a bona fide branch of the United States military? Say that again. What is the FBI? It is a civilian, working from the Attorney General's office. Its job is to investigate. It is a civilian organization, federal organization, just as alcohol tax, IRS, etc. Is that right? Does any of its functions involve military operations? Then what the hell were they doing with a tank? Now you notice the media ain't said a damn word about this question. What the hell were they doing with a tank? Can anybody give me a logical answer to that? No. No. Hey. The Bill of Rights. They ain't supposed to do that. That's all right. That's the same problem as Jeffries having now. Borrowed it to do what? What is their function? How does the chain of command go, y'all? Let's take Little Rock as an example. Well, most of y'all don't remember Little Rock, but take my word for it. Little Rock, the federal court gave an order to integrate Little Rock High School. This is what, 1956, 57. Forbes sent the National Guard in carefully to bar the school to these black children. The Attorney General informed the President that the state of Arkansas was in violation of a lawful federal law order. What was the President's next step? He did what? He federalized the Arkansas National Guard. And after he federalized them, he gave instructions then for them to go back and escort the kids into the school. So look at the situation we have here. You have the same people that were standing there the day before with the bayonets down these little girls' faces who are now standing up saying, y'all come on in. But what this does, this tells us clearly the responsibility, the beginning and the ending of the various governing bodies. If the first order you call upon in a civil thing is the police, if the police cannot handle it, the mayor or the whatever official is then calls upon the governor of the state, who then sends the National Guard in. The last thing they want to do is have the federal government dealing in on a local problem, right? Now then, if the governor of the state proves reluctant or drags his foot, or if the guard doesn't want to, then they federalize the guard. If the guard still can't do the job, then the next step is bringing in federal troops. Now, I ain't mentioned no FBI or IRS or no other agency of government in this. So therefore, if the FBI had determined, whoever's in charge, that some kind of force was needed, what was the supposed line of command they were supposed to have done? They were supposed to have gone to the what? Called in the Attorney General. We have a problem. Then the Attorney General will then ask the President for authorization to take care of the problem if necessary. But the FBI don't have no damn authority nowhere to go get no bulldozers or no damn tanks. The fact that they use the tanks tell you they've been training how to use the tanks. So a whole lot of information came out there that we need to know about and we need to look at. The media ain't going to ask these questions. These should be the first questions you should have been asked. But immediately they covered up. They couldn't even get the lie straight about who ordered it. Reno said, it was my order. And somebody went and said to Clinton, hey man, you can't leave out there that heat. 2 days later he comes out, oh, I ordered it. Now come on, this is a simple thing. Can't you say who was it that said go do so and so? But in the meantime, the people are dead. What's the rationale? We had information. Our inside spies had told us that the children were being abused. And they took care of that problem, didn't they? You'll never abuse them children again. Huh? Absurd society. Now, I want to thank you all and take a break here at this point. I don't know. I can tell you what the real deal was. In my opinion, Well, I've been African for a long time, and I've been studying Europeans for a long time. WASP, European folks are folks that's always on short sleeve, on a short fuse. They have very short patience, and they got big egos. And from the time when those 4 agents got shot, anybody know, I say, hey, no, eventually they're going to kill those people. If you know anything about the culture, you've been coming to these lectures, you all don't understand that. In other words, it was just a matter of when. And that's why one of the first words out of their mouth, listen, I grew up in the rural South. I wish you all had grown up 10, because the one thing you learn there, the old people taught you about European, about white folks and crackers, their behavior. Unfortunately, you all are sophisticated city people and you don't know. But just to share a couple of things parenthetically. You see, my Uncle them say that if you're standing up talking to a white man and he reaches down and starts scratching his balls, the first thing you do, if you got something cold cocking with it, knock hell out of him. If you ain't got nothing, run. Because there's something psychological about these people. Before they're getting ready to go to war, do battle, they always reach to see if their manhood is in place. At least the southern branch. Now, I'm not being vulgar, I'm just saying. So it's like all of a sudden I got to know that this is in place because I'm getting ready to do battle. And he ain't going to say nothing to you. Or you might be saying, oh, that's all right, why? Bam! Right? The other thing my uncle used to say, whenever you see a cracker digging in his ass, he's lying. I used to watch President Lyndon Johnson. Every time they would ask him a question of Vietnam, he would start digging his ass, and he's lying. So how you know? And I said, because these are culture, all of us have them. These are cultural habits. Now, I don't think it takes any great knowledge on my part to analyze what I'm saying. Once these people had, quote unquote, in their mind humiliated them, it was just a matter of time. And the only reason they didn't waste on them, they wanted to be in a position to say, well, we gave them 21 days, 51 days. And the guy even said, well, it comes down to a question of sovereignty. No nation can just stand by and have its sovereignty ignored and stepped on like that. So I said, well, what the hell were you doing in Panama? All right, or Grenada, right? So you find this thing of changing the rules to suit my needs. So when I look at this, and you look at the tank and all the rest of this and what they went in, the thing of it is they're so arrogant, it's like Dean Reynolds. They don't even bother to sit down and do a good cover story because they don't expect to be questioned. Now the other thing about this tells me this. Watch what's happened. Immediately after that, Janet Reno have an image problem as they see it. In the last 2 weeks, this woman has been everywhere. Right? She's been going to schools in the Bronx. They're giving her high profile, making all these statements, showing her or trying to humanize her. You only do this when you got some shit you're trying to cover up. Right? So when I see this, and I know the hypocrisy that these people deal in, see, when I say, when all you got to do and watch a court send you and hang you like and never say a word. You don't play these people. And y'all don't need to even ask me that. You know, your own experience, your history should have told you that. By this time, you should have developed this kind of instinct with your mama's milk. And I do not mean this as an insult to mother. And if you haven't learned them, by the time you get to be 21 or 22, you're in a poor roll for stumps. Because this pattern over and over and over, you see this going back. When you look at this Bible, once again, if you will be so kind as to begin, are y'all ready for your setup? Please allow them to show your fist of this, because I think that what you will see here, I don't know how much time we have, but I want you at least, I want y'all to at least be able to look in the horse's, I was going to say mouth, but that's not really what I mean. What you want to do first? You're going to do Jeff, or you want to do Reynolds first? To do so. Because, now I don't know about you, I don't have cable, I still live where I am. But to be able, and I would agree with him, I said, if we only show one segment, I want every African person, and I saw the message got clear, to watch this lady. After you leave here tonight, on your way home, I want every one of you to ask yourselves, what I told you about the politics of the Bible plays here. What qualification does W. Ann Reynolds have for the position that she holds as the chief executive of the third largest university system in the world, other than her white skin and, of course, the fact that she has a network? Obviously, I would think that our young people particularly need to see, just to see, as he said, the cross-examination. I know because you see that the contempt, obviously, that they had for us, that they didn't even do, and you were in there every day. Tell me if my analogy is correct. They didn't prepare this woman, or her arrogance would not allow her. No. There was one session in there where he asked her 5 times to get a question. They're through, Mr. Fleming. And she hemmed and hawed and would not, and the judge said to her, Chancellor, I must ask you, I mean, this is a clear-cut question, pretty much like he just said. This is about the 4th time that he had talked to her in these veins. He said, just give a clear question. It's clear what he's asking you. And the next word out of this woman's mouth was, Your Honor, can I ask him a question? Now this is, mind you, a lady with all them pile high and deep that don't understand. The judge said, you the witness, your job is to respond to questions. But the arrogance, and you look, the hatred in this woman's face is like, how dare this nigga question me? And their arrogance, they came in there, am I lying? They didn't come prepared. They did not come prepared. This woman admitted that she knew absolutely nothing about the institution she was supposed to be drawn. As a matter of fact, every time she would open her mouth, she would allow him, as you saw, to go down certain roads that he could not have gone down, and she'd answer the straight yes or no. And the judge even intimated to that. But she would open the room, and Fleming would go right on in there and have a feast. And she kept doing it over and over and over. And finally she opened one door about how we overtake all the background of everything the man said. He said, well, let me ask you this. Did the fact that you got a secret raise when you were the chancellor of the University of California, you got a secret raise, did that affect the evaluation of the trustees when they considered you for this job here? Now, she couldn't say a damn word, because who opened the can of worms? She did. But if she hadn't gone down that road, he could not have asked the question. So now they're looking and see that not only that you are chicanery, because you're wheeling and dealing underneath the whole thing. All of it came through. So we will in future, one thing that I would like to bring to you the next time to share with you, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a documentary which was shown first in 1985, Memory of the Death Camps. And this was the one in which they documented, for the only place I've ever seen, the fact that 155,000 African people were slaughtered in them concentration camps. And I had, when it was first broadcast in 85, I had taped it, but moving around, I couldn't find the tape. And every time, or many times when I would lecture and tie this in, everybody would want to know where the nail holes was. And I couldn't find the tape. As luck would have it, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, they rebroadcast this tape again. And so I was able to tape it. And I would like, on the next time I come, with the permission of people here, to set aside 1 hour, which is what that tape runs, because I believe it is a very important part of our history. First of all, we need to understand clearly the nature of the enemy. You say, how this lady, that distancing game. Because when these folks try to distance themselves from Hitler, you're supposed to forget that Hitler, that England, the English, the French, and the Germans are all same family. They're all, that's correct. They're all, the Anglo-Saxons are just a branch of the Teuton family. So when you look at this business of who put who in the gas chambers, there's no way to separate them or their history. If the Germans hadn't made the mistake of cooking white people, nobody would ever have complained. The same Germans destroyed the Herero people in Southwest Africa in 1885, and nobody said a damn word. The same Teutonic Leopold, King of the Belgians, cut off our brothers and sisters' hands. You know the story in Zaire. The world said nothing. The man who exposed it, they executed him. So they got another case. Again, it's like the FBI using the tank. And in the process, lifts the veil from our eyes from certain other things we need to know. Now, if you have any questions, I will entertain them. And again, thank you for coming.